Okay, so today we're talking about the informal fallacies. So what does that mean? Informal fallacies are mistakes in our reasoning. So as you can see above me, in that Dilbert cartoon, there's an example of the fallacy of the slippery slope. So a slippery slope fallacy occurs when you have somebody start with just sort of a single proposition and then say, okay, well, let's take another small jump, another small jump, another small jump. And then by the end of their chain of reasoning, they've hit this conclusion, right? This drastic conclusion that we should be avoiding. And so they say, if this first thing leads to this terrible conclusion, right, then I should never do the first thing, right? So for Dilbert's boss, he has to approve everything, or it could lead to him dying, right? He'd lose his job, and he goes on, can't find another, he's ended up being homeless, and then he dies. Right? So there's the slippery slope. That's why they call it that. But hopefully you can see there's a mistake in this reasoning, right? He's not actually proving that each next step follows necessarily, right? So just because he stops approving things doesn't mean he'll automatically lose his job, although he's pretending that that's the inevitable consequence, and so on for each and every step in the chain. Okay. So that's an example of an informal fallacy. We're going to go over some more today. Just as a warning, this video might be a little choppy because I'm not going to waste your time watching me write everything out. So after we talk about a fallacy, it's going to jump a little bit, but shouldn't be a big deal. So why do I want you to learn about the fallacies in the first place? That's a really important question, right? So mostly, like I said, these are really simple mistakes in our reasoning that all of us make, but most people don't realize they're even doing it. Right? So mostly I want to give you these tools, right? And you can do two things with them. One, you can avoid making these mistakes yourself, right? So if you know when you're making mistakes in reasoning, you can try to avoid these. So that way you're not giving out false information to everybody, right? And pretending like it's a rational conclusion. The other is that we get inundated with fallacious reasoning a lot. So especially from media, so newspaper, especially political media, all the opinion pieces that are out in political media, all other sorts of journalism as well. You'll see these in TV shows, although it's not as important there, right? Most of the time it can be used for comedic effect, but in news media, it's really important that we see that these people are making these mistakes so that we don't end up believing a bunch of false information, right? That's the biggest thing. We get to avoid believing false information because we can see that their conclusion doesn't follow from their premises, right? They'll have a number of statements or sentences and they'll say, if you believe these, then you should believe the conclusion. And if it's a fallacy, we can say, no, we shouldn't believe that conclusion. Outside of news media, I mean, you'll see it all the time on social media with your friends making bad inferences. So yeah, it's useful for those two things, helping you become a better thinker, a better critical thinker, a better reasoner. It's going to give you tools that you don't currently have. And then it's going to make you less susceptible to bad reasoning in other areas of your life. So that's why we learn about these informal fallacies. Okay, so today we're going to start with the fallacy of equivocation. So what does it mean to equivocate? So just so everybody knows, there's also a link to a worksheet. You can follow along with this. It'll have definitions written out for you, so that'll be really useful for your studying. But as of right now, let's just talk through it. So let's think about this first example, because this is an example of the fallacy of equivocation. So here are your sentences or your premises, right? The end of life is death. Happiness is the end of life. Therefore, death is happiness. Now, I know pessimistic memes go around all the time that say this is death is happiness, but I'm taking it for the most part. Most of us don't believe that, right? That death is happiness, because it's the end of all experience, or a different type of immaterial experience. So what's going wrong here? Right? Because the person who's giving you this argument says if you believe 1 and 2, then you should also believe 3. So why shouldn't we believe it? Well, it's because they're playing on ambiguity. Right? They're saying, hey, there's an ambiguous phrase here, and I'm going to use both of its meanings to get to my conclusion. So take a second to yourself, see if you can figure out which phrase is ambiguous here. And hopefully you see that they're using this phrase, end of life, in 2 very different ways. So in the first sentence, they're saying, the end of life is death. And here they literally just mean something like, it's the biological end of life. In the second sentence, they're saying happiness is the end of life. Well, here they really mean something like a goal. Right? So that's really important. They're playing on an ambiguity. And so, since we're not using the same meaning for end of life, the inference doesn't follow to our conclusion. So, what is an equivocation? It's where we play on an ambiguity in a word or phrase in order to draw a connection that actually isn't there. Right? So, because they play on this ambiguity, they get to draw this connection, but that's not actually there. So we shouldn't believe them. Right? So if somebody gives you this argument, you can go, fallacy of equivocation. I don't believe your conclusion. Okay, so now let's look at our second example here. So we have the sign at the party said, there's a toll for drinking. Alcohol is already taken a toll on my liver, so I get to drink for free. So imagine walking into a party, you see the sign there, says toll for drinking, and you go, great for me. You just stroll on in and start drinking for free. The party czar or the bouncer, whatever you have at your parties, right, isn't going to be very happy with you, right, trying to walk in and drink for free because you didn't actually pay the type of toll they're talking about. Right? So once again, you've played on an ambiguity in the word or phrasing. So take a second, and this one should be a little bit quicker. Right? Where is the equivocation occurring? What phrase is ambiguous, word or phrase is ambiguous, such that they're playing on that ambiguity to draw a connection that's not there? And in this one, the word is toll. Right, so in the first instance, what they're saying is there's a toll for drinking, and by toll, they mean there's a monetary toll. Right? They mean you have to pay a fee to drink at this party. Whereas this second use of the word toll means, it's hard to get the specific definition here, but something like the slow deterioration of your body, right? So by toll, they mean this sort of damage occurring to your body. I know that's off camera, but that's not super important. It just says damage. So they're playing on an ambiguity in the word toll in order to draw a conclusion that's not actually there. So hopefully you have a pretty good feel about what equivocation is now, and we'll move on to the next. All right, now we're on to the fallacy of amphiboly. And so this one's really similar to the fallacy of equivocation. It's another fallacy that deals with ambiguity. But here, the ambiguity is not in a particular word or phrase. The ambiguity is in the sentence structure itself. Right, so there's something missing from the sentence, or it's the way the sentence is written that allows it to be ambiguous. So, here's a great example with number 1. It says, save soap and waste paper. Now, my inflection might have given it away a little bit, but there's 2 ways in which you can read this sentence, right? So think to yourself for a second, what are the 2 ways in which you can read this sentence? You can pause here if you'd like more time. So the first way is that it could mean we need to save two different things: soap and waste paper. Right? So paper that is no longer of use to us. Right? So after you get your assignments back from most of your classes, I assume you don't have a big folder full of all the assignments you've ever done. Those are waste paper now. Right? So what we should be doing is saving them by recycling them. So the sentence could mean we need to save soap and waste paper, or it could mean that we should save soap and waste paper. Right? So we should be saving all the soap we can, but we should be wasting as much paper as possible. And so the reason this is an example of the fallacy of amphibole is that we can't tell which of the two is meant just by reading this sentence. I mean, most of us will assume it was that first reading, right, where it means to save both of those things. But we have no good reason to think one or the other. We're just sort of imposing ourselves on that. So it's ambiguous. The sentence structure is ambiguous. Okay, so let's read the second example here. The police were told to stop drinking on campus after midnight. Now they're able to respond to emergencies much better than they were before. So once again, either pause here, just take a second. Think of the two different ways in which you can read this sentence. Okay, so way number one, right, the police were told to stop drinking on campus after midnight themselves, right? So the police were told by their captain to stop drinking on campus after midnight. Maybe the police were bored, right? So up until midnight, they're super busy. But after midnight, everything slows down, so they were drinking on the job. And so now they were told to stop drinking. And that's why they're able to respond much better than they were before. So that could be your first way, right? It's actually the police who were told to stop drinking. The second way is that police were told to crack down on people who were drinking on campus after midnight, right? So now it's not the police who are being told to stop drinking, but the police are being told to stop other people from drinking on campus after midnight. So now they're able to respond to emergencies better than before, because they don't have to worry about all this superfluous drunken shenanigans going on that's leading to petty crime, right? Now they get to respond to emergencies because they've stopped all of that other smaller stuff from happening. So once again, it's unclear which of the two meanings we should be reading into the sentence, right? So we can read either one in without any additional information. It's completely ambiguous, and that's based on the sentence structure, right? So the police were told to stop drinking on campus after midnight, especially here's where we have some ambiguity, right? We're told to stop drinking. Is it they themselves who were told to stop drinking, or to stop others from drinking? So hopefully the fallacy of amphibole is clear to you now. So now we have the fallacies of composition and division, which are two closely related fallacies. For the most part, what's happening here is, in composition, you're taking some property that each of the parts have, and then making the mistake of assuming that the whole also has that same property, right? So you're saying the parts have this property, right? So we'll draw in here. All the parts, you guys can see that. All the parts have some property, and let's say each of them has property X. Then you're saying, well, it must follow then that the whole thing has property X. But that's just not true. Right? It doesn't follow necessarily that just because the parts all share something, that the whole will have the same thing. Right? So, perfect example here. Look at the parts of water, right? So hydrogen is not wet. Oxygen is not wet. So here's our property, right? Not wet. Each of the parts is not wet. Therefore, water is not wet. But clearly that's not true, right? So clearly this is false. So just because each of the parts have something doesn't mean the whole will have it.